Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to Investing in Oregon. My name is Dan Gandy, principal broker of the Operative Group, EugeneRealEstate.com, and president of the Lane County Rental Owners Association. Today, I'm going to be breaking down SB 586 and why this matters if you are an owner-occupier or a landlord in Oregon. But before we get started, please like, subscribe, follow Investing in Oregon, our YouTube channel. We're going to be making weekly updates on a regular basis to be able to provide you the most relevant information so you can pivot in your portfolio. So let's get started. What is SB 586 and how in real time does it matter to you, an investor, or you, a house hacker, or you, somebody who wants to move into a duplex, right? So the bill title is in relating to terminating of tenancy due to the sale of a dwelling unit and prescribing an effective date. Allows a landlord to pay a tenant 1 month's rent to reduce from 90 days to 60 days the termination notice period that a landlord must give the tenant when selling the dwelling unit to buyers who intend to reside in the unit. So before, what was the rule was that a tenancy after 1 year, not in a fixed term periodic lease, meaning you can't break it, it transferred with the property, there's no way to get the tenant out because they signed for a fixed term. It means that you had to provide a 90-day eviction or a notice of termination for a landlord qualifying reason. Buyer intends in good faith to occupy the unit. So when did you serve this? Typically, you'd serve this after the inspection period. So you go into contract, wait until the buyer has an inspection because you don't want to evict your tenant if they're removing themselves from the deal. And then once that inspection contingency is removed, you would serve the 90-day, which included a copy of the signed purchase and sale agreement or executed sales and purchase and sale agreement, and then the actual notice of termination for a landlord qualifying reason, checking the box that the buyer intends to, in good faith, occupy the unit. And now you're going to provide 1 month, 2 months rent based upon what jurisdiction are you in, or if you're in Multnomah County, a fixed amount of money depending on how many units or where that property resides in the state and what their local municipality rules are. So what I'm trying to say in all of this is it's taken the 90-day period and moved it to 60 days. While this is important, it is a shift towards the landlord's favor because what was happening is that mortgage occupancy law, so say you are a person who wanted to occupy a unit, a duplex that was double occupied, and you were going to have the seller evict one of those tenants, you had to occupy it if you were financing that property within 60 days of close, okay? Well, what would happen if you did a 30-day close and then evicted them yourself, right? You couldn't occupy it because of the 90-day problem. Also, if you're in a 30-day transaction, you typically had to convert that to a 90-day close to make sure you get the tenant out. And so a lot of times you're asking yourself as the buyer, do I close anyways and then take on the risk of the tenant not moving out? Or do I extend the closing and hope that my rate locks and all of these different situations that are coming down to mortgage friction? And I want to tell everybody out there, it seems such a small shift, small change, but it is a shift in the right direction because a tenant, a lot of times what I hear, I had a call yesterday. I'm going to give you guys a prime example. The call I got was a seller who owned an investment property that was tenant occupied, said, I'm getting rid of the tenants. They're going to be out in November. And I said, oh, did you have a signed executed purchase and sale agreement? And they're like, no, I'm going to be selling the property. So I'm telling them they need to move out. That's not how this works. You have to follow the law. And so a lot of misconception out there for landlords is that, or estates, probates, people who have inherited properties, is that you can get the property ready for market and you can remove the tenant prior to doing that. Well, I'm sorry. If the tenancy is over 1 year and now it's month to month automatically, you can't just evict a tenant because you want to sell the property. You have to go through the proper channels, and using SB 586 in most of the state is going to follow the 1 month's rent relocation that you're going to provide that tenant with a signed purchase and sale agreement showing proof that you have a buyer in good faith that's going to occupy the unit and that notice. and you have to strictly file that properly. You have to fill out that notice of termination properly. It needs to be served properly. It needs to have the right timelines and dates properly. I cannot say it enough. I've seen so many mistakes with this. That's why we always make sure we get a copy of both the payment and also the notice during our due diligence period if I'm representing a buyer who's going to occupy in good faith that property. Okay? So I want to break down a few things that are, I think, super important. So really what I want to show you guys, and forgive me for a second why my camera and my light just shuts off when I scroll in between properties or in between tabs, is that there's a few things to consider. The shorter 60-day notice better matches lender timelines like we've talked about and possession requirements for retail buyers. Landlords need to have a relocation funds ready and provide the purchase agreement proof with the notice. We talked about that. Tenant advocates have raised concerns that less notice may create a hardship in a tight rental market. Well, also, it's the golden handcuffs. If you're a landlord, you can't sell your property because no one wants to buy it because they can't occupy it. So there's a two-way street in that argument. And that's really what I've been trying to say. In America, depending on where you live, in what state, there's different types of restrictions to the landlord. And for some reason, Oregon, California, Washington are one of the toughest areas in America to be able to sell your property, have freedom to do and transfer and be able to transact with your own real property you own. So this tenant advocate raised concern about less notice being a hardship. They're already giving you 60 days. In most states, that is 30 days more than what you're given. 90 days was overkill. 60 days, I think, is a happy medium. And 30 days is really what the rest of the United States is doing in landlord-friendly states. So for investors, this could mean a smoother, faster sales process. That's ultimately what we want. And I want to talk about some of the complexities here with contracts, but also increased appeal to owner-occupant buyers, which can raise sales prices. When you see double occupied, when you see tenant occupied, next thing you know is we're writing an offer or we're asking for big concessions, because if the motivation is higher than the actual effort to get a tenant out and deal with relocation payments or dealing with evictions, sometimes what we see is properties selling at a discount when they're tenant occupied. I see it all the time. More predictive exit timelines make things easier, especially helpful for 1031 exchanges. Now let's talk about this. In the event that you're going to sell one of your investment properties and a buyer in good faith is going to move into it, it still means you can do a 1031 exchange. What it means is that once that property closes, you have 45 days to identify one. I think it's 3 properties that are going to be a potential match for you. And you have 180 days to close in order to perform that facilitation of the 1031. The relinquished property was the issue. There was a bunch of timelines and jumbling and trying to figure out and negotiate relocation payments and trying to get an owner occupier. So when you add an owner occupier to the buyer pool of your potential relinquished 1031 property, it allows you, in theory, to have a better, smoother transition to your replacement, especially when you're investing from Oregon out of state, which we see a lot of times. Now, all that thing I want to say is, when does it go into effect? September 2025 is when this law goes into effect. There's a 90-day adjournment period. I think comment below if I'm wrong, but SB 586 was signed into law on June 9, 2025. So 90 days from June 9, 2025 is when this law goes into effect. That's when you can serve notices with 60 days using the notice, using the proper relocation payment. But one layer on top of this is, if you're in the city of Eugene and other jurisdictions that have stricter laws, you're going to have to notify the special organization or the rental housing authority or whomever is managing that county or city and letting them know that you're performing this type of eviction. Registration and notification is another layer of this. And so when I say this is a big win for landlords, it's one step in the right direction to open your buyer pool, to help your 1031 exchange facilitate smoother, to help you understand the mortgage friction in terms of requirements and making things easier for exiting properties when you own real property. This is a big win. So what do you guys think? Do you think this is the right direction for the tenant? Do you think this is the right direction for a landlord? Comment below. I like to hear comments. I like to see people engaged in these types of arguments, good or bad, don't care. But investing in Oregon is an open forum. I want people to be able to get these resources and information and be able to run with it. Once again, my name is Dan Gandy. I'm the owner of EugeneRealEstate.com, the operative group, and the president of the Lane ROA. Thank you for watching. I'll see you in the next one.